Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melissa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to this week's episode. I'm so happy you're here and listening. Today, we're going to talk about the most common consulting pricing mistake that I see being made. I want to make sure you're aware of this problem, this mistake, and so that you can avoid it. I want to make sure that you're avoiding these types of mistakes that most of us make in our consulting businesses so that ultimately you're making more money, you're feeling more fulfilled in the work that you're doing, and you feel more autonomy and freedom with the way you're delivering your work. So with that, before we dive into today's topic, I did want to share with you something really exciting that I received in my inbox this week. It was from someone who listens to the podcast, and she just shared a couple of sentences that made me really excited. And I wanted to share these with you too, in case they inspire you. What she said is, I just signed a client using the concepts that you shared in your retainer podcast. I've been trying to figure out how to make a retainer work without it just trading time for dollars. And that podcast helped me structure something that worked for my client and gives me recurring revenue. So she is referring to episode 111 about consulting advisory retainers. Go listen to that if you haven't already and start experimenting with retainers in your business. I was so excited that she was able to take that episode, go put it into practice, and sign her first retainer client. So that is a little bit of inspiration for you today as we get started. So now let's pivot into today's topic, the most common consulting pricing mistake. Here's what inspired this episode today. I was presenting yesterday in a group of freelancers and consultants with an expert. There were two of us presenting, myself and an expert who is in Hungary. His name is Peter Balog. I hope I said his last name correctly, but Peter runs a company called Freelance Pizza, and he is a great speaker. Had so much fun really dovetailing with him, and we both presented. He presented first. We had never met each other. We did not collaborate at all on our topics, but they really complemented each other so well, as if we had planned them in advance. It was so much fun. And so that just really inspired me to dive into this topic with you today, the consulting pricing mistake that you want to avoid. So that's a little bit of background on where the episode I came from. But Peter and I talked for about an hour between content and answering questions and networking in this group of freelancers that were all across the globe. And it's so inspiring to see how many consultants and freelancers are out there and growing by the month and really craving the resources and the tools to be successful in running their own businesses. It's truly, we were talking about this last week with Dr. John Younger, what's happening right now with the future of work and how it's evolving. And corporate clients, enterprise clients are so much more open now to using consultants to fulfill their business needs, and it's just growing. So anyway, I'm way off on a tangent right now, but the future of our industry as independent consultants and experts, it couldn't be better. There's so much runway out there for you to be successful as an independent consultant and make sure that you're running your business in a way that is lucrative for you and flexible for you, the things that you want to have, why you created your business in the first place. So one of those aspects is what we're focused on today, and that is pricing. So with that, let's talk about today's agenda. So today's agenda, I'm going to talk with you and share what is this common pricing mistake. So I'll unveil it here in a moment. Then I'll share why it's happening for you. Why are you making this mistake if you're making it, as most consultants are, to some degree. And then I'll share with you what to do instead. And then we'll wrap up the episode. So that is our agenda. Before we dive in, I want to share with you the resource that is the best resource to use in complement to today's episode so that you are putting what you're hearing into action. And that resource is the Independent Consultants Pricing Assessment. If you've listened to this podcast before, you've heard me talking about it. You might not have taken the step to go take that pricing assessment yet, or it may have been a while since you've taken it. Either way, go take that pricing assessment. It will help you pinpoint opportunities, low hanging fruit that you can start leveraging to adjust and shift your pricing and avoid this mistake that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So you can go start that assessment at the URL. The link is IC, so the two letters, independent consulting, so icpricing.com. The two letters IC, the word pricing.com. Okay, so with that, hopefully that resource will be a great complement to today's topic. Let's dive in and start with what is this common consulting pricing mistake? Here's what it is. Most pricing conversations revolve around you understanding the client's business drivers. So you're diving in and doing discovery and asking the client, about what their challenges are and why they want to solve those challenges and what they think the solution looks like. You might be asking the client questions about their budget and what they've allocated for the type of work that you do. You might be trying to figure out the maximum that the client would be willing to pay. So often we want this secret number so desperately to know what is the number the client would pay us. What would they be willing to pay? Are we undercutting ourselves? We don't want to leave money on the table. This is typically what pricing conversations revolve around. And, going back into different episodes that relate into pricing, especially value-based pricing, you've heard me talking about understanding all of these things from the client's perspective so that then you can create a proposal and you can work the client through to get to a signed statement of work and engagement and move forward. We talk about this side of the equation so often and really understanding those value drivers and building up a business case. And let me just, before I move on to and tell you, unveil the mistake, let me say the other thing that often happens if you're not yet at the place of value-based pricing, it's the same thing, right? You're trying to figure out what is the maximum bill rate that this client would be willing to pay. You might be scouring the internet trying to figure out what do other consultants get paid for this type of work? And does it make sense to negotiate this hourly rate? So regardless of whether you're running a value-based pricing type of a model or an hourly or daily type of model, that's what's happening is you're looking at, so often, if you're like most consultants, you're looking at this topic from the client's perspective. What are they willing to pay? And how can you become aware of what they're willing to pay or what should be paid, quote unquote, should be paid in the market? What's a good market rate? Because you're worried about leaving money on the table. And you, of course, want to maximize what you're getting compensated for the work that you do. That's how most consulting pricing occurs in one or, in some variation of what I just described. But here's what's missing. Here's what the common mistake is. It's you missing the other side of the equation. And by that, I mean you missing your business pricing. You missing not knowing or being clear on what your minimum pricing is. Peter was talking about it in our conversation yesterday that I was referring to. What is your minimum pricing? What are you really willing to take? A lot of times when I work with consultants, they don't even have that number. They're not sure. They just want to maximize what the client is willing to pay and don't think about it from their business perspective. So today I want to really dive into this with you. And you might know the number logically. You might know what your minimum bill rate is logically, or you might know what your minimum daily rate is logically, or you might even know what your minimum is as it relates to project-based work or value-based pricing or fixed fee-based pricing, whatever it is that you're using. But today I want to encourage you to take that down into another level. And that's what we're talking about today. So if you don't have this minimum pricing, I want to make sure that you establish it. And if you already do have some idea of what the minimum pricing is, I want to help you today take that down to another level so that you avoid making this most common mistake. Because at the end of the day, if you're making this most common mistake, which is not knowing what your business pricing is, not knowing what your walkaway is, then you are basically running a business model that I like to call the make it work business model. That, of course, the business model of, I'll figure out how to make it work ends up backfiring on you and does end up in a situation where you're earning less than you're capable of earning and most likely hitting plateaus. Okay, so with this, now that I've explained the mistake to you, that most common consulting mistake, not really being clear about your own pricing requirements, just really trying to make it work based on what the client is telling you. Let's now dive into understanding why this is happening. It's so important to always look at the root cause of why something might be happening in your business, both on the good side, if something is going really well in your business, understand why that is, because that helps you to really have control over and understanding of why something great is happening so you could do more of it. Similarly, why might you be making a mistake like this? Really understanding the root cause of the mistake so that then you can address the root cause and not just put a band aid over or apply some of the tools that I'll give you here in a minute on a shaky foundation. So, we want to make sure your foundation is really strong. And in order to have a strong foundation, you want to understand the root cause of why you might be making certain mistakes, such as this common pricing mistake. So, why might you be not thinking about your side of the equation as you're working through pricing or kind of waving your hand at what your minimum pricing is, but not truly understanding the drivers behind it and why you've set that minimum pricing and why it makes sense? So, with that, let's talk about these two root causes. The first is likely you are still thinking like an employee instead of a business owner when it comes to pricing. Most of us are most familiar with landing full time roles where we go through a whole interview process. The company, we might give them some sense of what we had been making previously or what we want to be making. And then they come back with an offer and we negotiate it. You know the drill. And that's what we're most used to doing. And that's what we end up replicating. If we're not intentional about the way we're running our consulting business, we end up replicating that same type of process when it comes to our consulting pricing. So, for example, you might, uncover an opportunity with a potential consulting client. You might go through a process where they're kind of interviewing you in some respects and you're interviewing them to really understand and get into the details of what it is that their problems are and what the best solution is for those problems. And then by default kind of fall into a mode of treating this like a salary negotiation, like a full time type of a negotiation, where it feels like either they're offering you a certain rate and you're feeling like you're in a place where you need to negotiate that like you would in a salary, or perhaps you're going through a process to scope it out and price it out. But the client is looking at it from the lens of, what would I be paying a full time employee to do this work? And how does this calculation match up against it or not? And the conversations as a result of either you, for sure, the consulting buyer, most of the time is thinking about things from more of a full time employee perspective because that's what they're used to. And you likely are also thinking about it from that perspective because that's what you've been most accustomed to. And so, then, of course, one of the root causes of getting into the cycle of really making it a buyer centric pricing conversation versus your business centric pricing conversation is because you're coming at it from that employee mindset. So that's the first root cause of why this might be happening, is thinking about it like an employee instead of like a business owner. And before I move on to the second reason, I will tell you how to overcome this here in a moment. You might be saying, well, okay, I might be thinking about this an employee, but now what? I will tell you here in a moment. But I first want to talk about the second root cause. The second root cause of why this could be happening, why you might be approaching the consulting pricing process really from not a holistic lens here, from your business perspective and only from the client's perspective, is because you are in a scarcity mindset. So many of us are in a scarcity mindset. How do you know if you're in a scarcity mindset? You're worried about, if I don't take this opportunity, there might not be another opportunity. I better figure out how to negotiate as best I can, get as much money as I can, and make this engagement work for me. That second root cause is being in that scarcity mindset. The scarcity mindset comes from an unhealthy pipeline, an empty pipeline. It comes from you, even if your pipeline is empty, you not knowing what your own business formula is to fill that pipeline again. Of course, your pipeline is going to be empty at different phases of your business. That's normal. But knowing that and being confident in and knowing exactly how you refill it, how long it takes to refill it, how long it takes to close a client once they're in the pipeline, all of those things. If you don't have those, then of course you're going to latch on whatever opportunity comes your way and just figure out how to make the pricing work from the mindset of, well, let me just maximize what they're willing to pay versus thinking about it as a business owner and what it is that you charge and the economics that make sense for your business. Another reason you may be, a similar reason you may be in this scarcity mindset is that you haven't built up that demand. You haven't built up your reputation to the point of being sought after where you or known for what you do. You haven't built up that reputation that you're the go-to person for a specific problem that you solve. That doesn't happen overnight. That's something that you consistently work at in order to create that reputation and build yourself, a funnel of inbound leads that come to you. When you haven't focused on that at all, or you think it's not possible for you, of course, you're going to be in a more of a scarcity mindset. Another reason you may be in a scarcity mindset, or another kind of source of the scarcity mindset, is thinking that gaps in revenue are a problem, that you've got to constantly be busy or constantly be utilized, kind of like a paycheck every 2 weeks. That's not necessarily true either. You can hit your annual revenue numbers and certainly have gaps in revenue. I've had clients who have months of gaps in revenue and still hit their annual goal because they're not settling for whatever work comes their way because they're worried about having cash flow at all times. They're thinking about, how am I running this business and creating this quarterly or annual revenue goals that I've got, and have a really, solid reserve in my business to pay my bills. And I'm not here making a consulting business that's generating a paycheck for me on a every 2 week basis. I'm generating a business or creating a business that has healthy pipeline, healthy demand, healthy reserves. And I don't have to figure out how to make any one given pricing offer by a given client work for me. So, those are the two main root causes of why you might be making that consulting pricing mistake, which, let me repeat the mistake again. The mistake is when you're thinking about the pricing just from the client's lens. When you're thinking about, how do I maximize what they're willing to pay? Just want to get the most out of this engagement and make it work. Make sure that I don't have a gap in my revenue. It's so important to be looking at this pricing process from both lenses, from, of course, what the client's business drivers are, what the pricing would look like that makes sense based on the results and the value that they're getting from the work that you are doing, and also what your business needs to be healthy, and also what you require from a pricing perspective. So now that you fully understand what the pricing mistake is and why it's happening, which comes down to your mindset, it comes down to the way you're looking at pricing, the way you're looking at your business. Now I'll share with you the methods of avoiding and or getting out of this mistake when you're making it. I'm not going to say if you're making it, it's when you're making it, because all of us make this type of mistake. A lot of times it comes from fear, that scarcity, fear of, I've got this client in front of me. They're really not willing to pay even what my minimum is, but I'm afraid that there aren't going to be any more opportunities. So I better figure out how to make it work. It comes from fear most of the time, right? And so coming back at this and looking at what can you do instead? And so I'm going to share with you three tools here to avoid and overcome that most common pricing mistake of only looking at pricing from the client's lens and not also from your lens, your business lens. So, with that, the first thing you want to be doing is figure out your pricing minimum, whatever that needs to look like. I'll give you an example here. You might say, let's make some easy math. Let's say that you have a $400,000 goal for this year. You have a $400,000 goal for this year. So if we break that down, there's 100K per quarter. When you think about your pricing minimum, it can become very, very clear because if you're generating $100,000 per quarter, then you just break that down and say, look, my goal here is to create 2 retainers. Let's make some more easy math. If I do 2 retainers, let's say they're $25,000 per quarter. So that's $8,300 per month each. That equals 50K, right? 50K because each of the retainers is 25,000. So half of your quarterly number is retainer work. And the other one, let's say, is a project. So you want to go land yourself every quarter a 50K project or every 6 months, a 100K project. When you break it down like that and see what the value of your capacity is, it becomes so much more clear that what you're looking for and what your capacity is valued at. And ultimately, what you want to land to make the numbers work in your business versus the opposite, which is taking the work that comes to you and figuring out how to maximize what they're willing to pay and then trying to make your business work from that direction. If you see here, when you break down your business into the simple math, it can be so much more clear about what your requirements are and what types of clients you're willing to take on who are consuming your capacity. If you're taking on a client, let's just use an example, you agree to a client project that comes out to 25K. Now you've got a 25K deficit. You had set a goal of, to make your 100K per quarter number, you've got to land a project that's worth 50K. So you negotiate, you get to a 25K agreement for a project. It consumes your entire quarter. Now you've got to figure out how do you fill in that 25K revenue gap, even though they've consumed your capacity. So when you look at your business from this perspective, it can make your pricing and the minimums and the drivers behind your pricing and what you need for your business to be so much more clear. And when you're so much more clear about your business and what your pricing requirements are, and matching that up to the value that you deliver to your clients, this is going to be the key to you maximizing the capacity that you've got and the value of that capacity for your own business. So that's the first thing that you want to be doing is figuring out these numbers for yourself. Figure out the numbers for yourself and what it is that you want versus the opposite, which is let's see what comes to me. Let's see how do I maximize what's coming to me and how do I make that work? That's the first tool. The second tool that I'll give you is really want to address those root causes. Start thinking about this as the business owner instead of the employee. Commit to becoming the version of you who's the business owner, who knows and is confident with repeatedly creating opportunities that match up to your business requirements. This is really important work. Becoming the business owner who repeatedly creates opportunities that match up to your requirements, your pricing requirements, your nature of the work requirements, your ideal client requirements, whatever your requirements are. Become the version of you, the business owner, who repeatedly creates and fills your pipeline with opportunities that match those requirements. This is the opposite of, I'm going to figure out how to fill my pipeline with whatever I can and figure out how to make those things work, maximize whatever's in the pipeline. Again, this is the opposite. This is you figuring out, which requires your brain. How do I become the business owner who repeatedly creates opportunities that match my pricing requirements, that match my revenue requirements, that match my nature of work requirements? And then the third tool addresses that scarcity, getting yourself to the place where you are coming at your business from an abundant mindset, where you know that and truly believe that there are opportunities out there, that you know how to find them, that you know how to walk them through a really effective sales process. So even if they came into the conversations thinking that they would pay you $200 an hour, that you've navigated them through a process where it becomes very clear that you do not charge by the hour, that you do not charge by the day, that you charge based on the value of the work that you're doing, which likely is in the millions, multiple millions of dollars, and you're just charging a small percentage of that. Creating that context for them is so important. So becoming that version of you, work on your own mindset. Your current mindset likely is in that employee zone, likely is in that scarcity zone, as so many of ours are, because we are humans. And so you want to be working on cultivating and strengthening and building that foundation of how does a healthy business owner think? I'm going to think like that. How does someone has an abundant mindset, who's not worried about leaving money on the table with any one given deal, or who's not worried about turning work away because it doesn't meet your minimum requirements, who has become that version of a business owner who sees that there's so many opportunities out there and knows how to turn those opportunities into a pipeline and ultimately into clients. So that is the type of work that is so important that most consultants overlook and neglect, is working on their business owner mindset in addition to working on the strategies and tactics of pricing as well. So with that, let's wrap up for today. Hopefully this gave you a really good insight into pricing mistakes that you might be making in your business. The most common pricing mistake, which is really looking at this from the client lens and figuring out how to make whatever they're offering you work, how to maximize whatever they're offering you, and forgetting that you are running a business and that you have the ability to decide what are the minimums that you're willing to agree to. What is your own process of walking a client through to provide them with pricing, and not trying to fit into their own box because you're coming at this from an employee lens, because you're coming at this from a scarcity lens, and because you haven't fully mapped out your sales process to drive to the ultimate end state, which is you offering pricing that works for your business and that matches up so effectively to what the client's ultimate outcomes are. All right, my friend, thank you for tuning in. I would love to hear more about any pricing challenges that you have. Send me an email and let me know if there are any topics you want me to cover on the podcast. And in the meantime, go to IC, the two letters ICpricing.com, so you can take that pricing assessment and uncover areas of opportunity for you in your business to increase your pricing, make your pricing more aligned to your own business goals, and stop with the what I like to call the make it work business model. All right, see you again next week. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.